everybody. Thank you so much for taking time to join us at the Rare Rounds. We are excited for our upcoming discussion on advancing diversity and inclusion in clinical research. Before we get everything kicked off, I wanted to review a few brief housekeeping notes. First of all, attendees are currently muted. And if we do have a smaller, more intimate group, I'll be able to unmute and we can have a more intimate discussion. We definitely encourage you to use the chat function in the Zoom window for any questions that you may have throughout the session. And the moderator team, which is myself, will present them to our speakers that are with us. To open the chat, click on the chat button located on the meeting controls at the bottom or top of your screen near the mute icon. If there are questions that are not able to be addressed by the speakers or we run short on time, we will do our best to follow up after the program. In the interest of making us all feel more connected for the discussion, I'd like to ask everyone to turn on their videos as comfortable. If you have any technical issues in the conference platform, there's a tech support chat box that you can go to and ask any questions about sound, video connection, access to any part of the program. Finally, we encourage you all to participate as active listeners and take advantage of an opportunity to hear from leaders and experts here and ask questions of them. This program is your time to learn and find answers on critical challenges in rare disease research. I'm now pleased to welcome our discussion leaders, Arnie Joseph from Chroma Health Solutions, Marjorie Dejoie Brewer from the Sickle Cell Disease Association of America and Philadelphia, Delaware Valley chapter, and Pernessa Seele from Baum and Gilead. They will each share a more complete background as we delve into the conversation. But for now, I'd like to invite Arnie Joseph from Chroma Health Solutions to kick things off. Thank you, Arnie.
Yes, hi, I'm Arnie Joseph. I'm the founder of Chroma Health Solutions. We specialize in developing culturally relevant strategies to engage patients and consumers from high-risk communities. I've spent some time working with several advocacy groups and the U.S. Department of Health in that capacity, and I'm very excited to be here.
And Marjorie?
I'm so sorry. Hi, everyone. I'm Marjorie Dejoie Brewer. I am the medical director for the Philadelphia, Delaware Valley chapter of SCDA, as formerly said. I have a unique perspective in that I am a provider. I am a patient. I've worked on multiple clinical trials. I've held roles that encompass patient engagement and advocacy groups. One most recently at Pfizer, in working with the sickle cell community and our sickle cell campaign for medication for patients, recruiting patients and looking at the results and then communicating with patients and involving them in the process. I've also been involved in other disease processes within the CHOP setting and working with our patient population there, explaining clinical trials to them, getting them registered. So I've conducted some of those clinical research projects. So it gives me that perspective of seeing it from every angle and knowing how important that connection is to the patient population. So looking forward to talking to all of you.
Hi, I am Pernessa Seele, and I am the CEO and the founder of the Baum and Gilead. And the Baum and Gilead, for 31 years, we have been mobilizing the faith community primarily in the African-American community, to be engaged in health disparities, including clinical trials, because we understand the critical role that faith plays in our community. So our work is to work with advocacy groups and change social and cultural norms that would encourage and engage and retain African Americans, diverse communities in clinical trials. We are where public health and faith connect. Thank you.
So Arnie, would you like to kick us off with the discussion and talking more about your role and what you're doing to make sure that we are inclusive in our approach and that we are asking the right questions and doing the right thing here?
Yes, I would say the most important step in addressing the relatively low or the disparately low percentages of participants that are from African American, Latino, and Asian communities is to understand the barriers that exist. And I know my fellow panelists have a great deal of experience with this, so I'm not going to take up too much time, but there are deeply entrenched barriers in these communities that preclude them from uh, participating in clinical trials. So that's from their side. From the other side, from the pharmaceutical industry, I've been involved with the pharmaceutical industry since 1985, and I have seen numerous clinical trials. I've worked that had lower single digit, 1%, 2%, 3% participation by African Americans and Latinos, and that's a major problem when you talk about some of the large number of diseases that over-index in those communities. So if you're doing clinical trials for HIV, Hep C, cardiovascular diseases and conditions, these are the communities where the diseases over-index, but yet the clinical trials of the medications have extremely low numbers. Or they will, and again, I've seen it so many times over 3 decades, they'll do the clinical trial in communities, global communities like Japan and Northern Europe, where comorbidities are low, lifestyle is very different, BMI is very different, behaviors are different, so forth. So it's extremely important first, before you make any steps to recruitment of these populations, you have to understand the barriers. And there are a plethora of studies that go over these. I've sent some so that I believe here we can share that with the audience at a later date. But there are some wonderful studies that discuss how these barriers came to be, how deeply entrenched they are, and then they also recommend best practices like Pernessa just shared with everyone. If the faith-based community is extremely strong in many parts of the country, there are so many community groups, advocacy groups, so forth, Black fraternities, sororities. There are many organizations with whom you should partner in order to address these issues. But if those issues are not addressed, you're going to have the same, we're going to keep getting what we've been getting. And I believe that with the other panelists on here and work with your organization, we can make those changes. But I cannot stress enough how strongly I understand and want to articulate that we've got to address those deep-seated barriers and behaviors towards participating in clinical trials.
And I would add to piggyback off of what Arnie said, I think one thing that's also extremely important is to understand the microcosm that the patient lives in. So in the different disease processes and even different areas that I've worked in, understanding the disease process for one person does not mean or indicate that you understand it for everyone, especially people of different colors. And then even within the different colors, the different races, you also have to understand, depending on where they're from, where you approach the disease from, how they handle and what their community is built from, because that's going to be different. So then it's, again, one size doesn't fit all. And what that will require the investigators to do, the individuals who are participating and running the research, is to actually try to feel, quote unquote, and put themselves in the shoes of the individuals who are suffering from the ailment that you are trying to address, in order to get as genuine an understanding of what they're going through. I mean, just looking at their clinical process and when they come to the hospital is so limited. You definitely have to expand your scope. And then with that understanding, with being able to sit with them and see things from their perspective, because we all come with inherent biases and we're going to think that we understand cardiomyopathy is because I've read up on it and I've seen 5 people with it. Well, the rest of the individuals that you're going to be interacting with will have different experiences. And where we found success is in trying to understand what those experiences are and then meeting the patient where they're at. And the patient a lot of time is not a single person, it's a family. And with that approach and being able to trust, and as you meet the barriers, as Arnie pointed out, you don't turn away or put the onus on some other X factor. You realize that there will be many, but you're willing to stay with it, sit where it gets uncomfortable and progress from there, because then that also shows that you're committed to that cause and committed to the health and the betterment or improvement of that patient. And in that pattern, that those set of behaviors, if you set forth and then you put your knowledge behind that, I find that the success with the patient population, and at least that willingness of the patient population to then have the conversation with you, because you're meeting them where they're at and you're really sitting at their table, then that will change the paradigm, and you'll no longer have the 1% that signs up or is willing to participate. You'll have the 25%, you'll have the 30%, because now they have a different understanding of the role that you as the researcher is willing to play, which is one that you're very invested in, and understand what they're going through to meet their needs. And then they're willing to sit with you and have that conversation.
Well, thank you so much. And let me jump in with my word. I have one word that I think is very, very key. That's a thread throughout everything that Arnie and Marjorie has said, and that's the word intentional. We must become intentional about diversity and inclusion. Frankly, as I sit here and listen and think about this conversation that has been going on for several years on how do we diverse and include, African Americans, Latinos in clinical studies. I think that we need to do an assessment of our pharmaceutical companies. Are you all doing are they doing the changing? Mm-hmm. Because I think that we are still looking for, the patient to do the change so that they can get into our trials. And I think that's a little bit convoluted, because, we have to be intentional from the beginning to the end on diversity and inclusion. We must make sure that, I'm sure Marjorie will lift us up, that people who look like the patients you're trying to include, that we all look alike, that we're not asking them. I know several situations where patients have to go out of their way to another community that does not look like them, nor do they want them in that community. So by the time they're there sitting in the lobby the first time, they're very clear they're not going back just because of how they've been treated. So I think that, I'm sure you expected us to have frank conversation. I think that intentional from beginning to the end must be clear. And we must begin now to look at protocols from the beginning. What has been done from the pharmaceutical perspective up until now what's the assessment on the change? What has transformed since we've been having these conversations? What have you done to put in place to make a difference? Because it's time for a change, not to have the same conversation about doing the change. I'm gonna leave it there for you. Mm-hmm.
And to piggyback on that, what you'll find is a lot of time when you do that history, and Arnie and I have spoken about that, you see that people are doing it the same exact way that they did last year and the year before and the year before. So when you are, no matter what side of the equation you are, but when you are a proponent of the patient and you generally want success and you want treatments, let me speak as a provider, and you look at that information and you realize they're doing it the same way they did before, which wasn't successful, with maybe one minor change. It is a little defeating, because then to have that conversation, because the patient will come to you because they trust you as their provider and they want to follow in your lead because they've built this relationship with you over years. But if you are not able to say, well, they're doing it differently this time because of X, Y, and Z,
Right.
then that conversation ends, not with the provider, but with the possibility of continuing. So when individuals look at the history of each company and what they're proposing and what they're doing, and do not see an inkling of anything being done different, or more individuals who look like them, or an effort being put forward to genuinely, with intent, be more inclusive, because that's very specific. You can say you're including individuals, but are you really being intent on being inclusive? They look at that and they do their history, and that is becomes an automatic no, unfortunately, for many individuals.
Mhm. Mhm. So what are some key misunderstandings? Common missteps by either advocacy groups or research or industry? Yeah, Arnie, go ahead.
No, Arnie.
And do the old-fashioned.
Yes.
There are many. Number one, when you look at the agencies that pharma uses to engage or to educate the target audience, there's a disconnect right from the beginning. I've seen these for over 3 decades, where the recruitment materials always feature people. Let's see, you guys are from. They're always featuring people that look like they are in Nantucket or Torrey Pines, or on the coast of Maine, North Shore, Chicago, strolling around with their lovely sweaters, and they're smiling and they're happy. And then, so that's the imagery, and that's almost always wrong. Or they may even swap it out and put a Latino or an African American in there, and then they'll still put them in Nantucket, on Torrey Pines and what have you. So the imagery is very wrong. Number two, I can't even say level of cultural competency, because there is usually none. It's written in a way, it does not abide by what's called plain language principles. So the materials tend to always be written at a very high college level, very science oriented, lots of copy, very few breaks. So the material's wrong, and then where they go to recruit, wrong. They're going to go to the top tier academic centers. They're not going to go to the places that African Americans, Latino feel comfortable. They're not advertising in community centers, in houses of worship, in barbershops, beauty shops. They're always, I just don't understand this. They're always all scattered around the clinic offices of the top tier center, where a lot of African Americans and Latinos don't feel comfortable going until things are really bad. So you've got to understand, it all comes back to cultural proficiency and understanding of the target audience. And it's extremely rare that the pharmaceutical industry and the agencies that they use will do ethnographic research. It's very rare that they will go into West Baltimore. Very rare they'll go into North Philly, West Philly, and go to community centers and talk to prospective patients. And Marjorie's right there. I mean, she's in Penn, and I see her nodding her head. So they don't. It's amazing to me that they're still doing the same thing, and then they wonder why it doesn't work. Well, if this is the group you want to work with, it's imperative you involve them from jump, right? From the very beginning. You sit them down, you talk about what it is you're looking to do, you get the community leaders involved, the faith-based leaders involved, the Pernessa Seals of the world. You sit down, you work with them in her community. Don't make her come to you. You go with her community and you ask them, what is it how can we do this? With whom could we be working? And then as you're developing the recruitment materials, let us share with you what we're looking to help us craft this, because the majority of when I look at these rare diseases, hereditary amyloidosis, sarcoidosis, all of those blood diseases, the majority of the people that you're targeting are African Americans. So why are you saying you're going to do a multicultural effort? It's not multicultural. The majority of the people you're targeting are one culture. So why in the world aren't you targeting them from the very beginning? Since this panel is not 6 hours long, I'm going to stop because I have a lot more to say. But that's something that it absolutely has to change, and it has to change today.
So I'd like to piggyback on 2 points that Arnie made, because I think all the points were important, but just to bring them to the forefront even more. The one on imagery. as many times as we've helped and participated in making brochures or receiving brochures, interestingly enough, in my role, one of the immediate feedbacks, I think within the first week, and I looked at the team and I said, look at the cover of this. Do you realize that every single sickle cell patient will look at this and say, where did they get this picture? This is not me. Put the book down and not want to have any other conversation. Because the person was African American, but by no means was there a sense of connection. So then the question that I received was, you can tell that from the cover? Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. There's an immediate connect or disconnect. So then you have to do a better job in choosing your imagery. And that doesn't mean that the person has to look like they're in poverty or anything like that. It can still be a vivid, beautiful picture, but it needs to be one that the patient population and community can connect with. That was number one. Number two, Arnie made a point about saying you go and meet them in their offices, if it's the advocacy groups or if it's the faith-based groups or whatever, or an entity in the community, and you ask them kind of what they need and what you think their perspective, the perspective needs to be and the approach needs to be. Once you get that information, don't rework it into what you think that information would be best modeled as. If you sit down to have an hour conversation and you're getting honest response from them. You're getting to the best of their ability what they have seen and felt and experienced for years. But then the tendency is to go back to the main office, break it down, and say, well, how can we do this from our perspective? Or maybe we can make it better. And maybe what they really meant was, no, they actually told you what they really meant. What would be best is if you think that it can be done better based on what they told you, work with them to elevate that. Do not go and reformulate, then propose another idea that you think, quote unquote, includes what they said, and wonder why didn't they show up for it or adopt this program that we put together or that we're giving them funds for? Because at the end of the day, it's actually it does not reflect what was said in that conversation, not genuinely. So I just wanted to really amplify those 2 points, because again, I could, as Arnie said, could go on for hours, but I see it happen so many times over and over and over, and I feel like they are easily correctable. I mean, they're simple enough that they can be addressed on a level that would flip the script and change the conversation so quickly. It's baffling at times why it's not done and pursued.
Mm-hmm. So I want to jump in and piggyback on something Arnie said around communities of color. Because sometimes as I am working with, as BOM is working with pharmaceutical companies, that the African-American word seems to be taboo. We want to engage more African-Americans in clinical trials, but we don't want to say African-Americans. We want to say communities of color. Case in point, we want to say diversity. But you're talking about, you want to include African Americans. When we say communities of color, that takes on an even broader range. African Americans, we are not a monolithic population. There are different economic, sociology, whatever, broad stroke of African Americans. So I think that the language that we use in saying we want to engage, we need to bring it down, nail it down to, we want to engage more Latinos, we want to engage more Asians, we want to engage more African Americans, and be intentional about your cultural competence about who you want to reach, and not just put everybody into the community of color basket, because that's the globe. That's the whole world. The whole world is communities of color except one ethnic group. And we need to be very, back to that word, intentional, and be able to say, we want more African Americans in our clinical trials, and then be intentional about getting it with everything that we are bringing forth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do you feel that it's a desire to be politically correct or all inclusive, and we're kind of missing missing the point then by communicating this terminology that's not getting us to where we need to be?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Pernessa.
You go right ahead. You go right ahead.
I think, because I have a knee-jerk reaction to that question, I'm sure we all do.
That's why I said you go first.
I think there is this misconception, and again, because I see it on so many different levels, I think as we all do, that we all actually fit under one umbrella. And that if we are able to, I mean, it's definitely easier to be able to print out all your information and use one word that's inclusive of everyone, if that's how you want to look at it. But we are all different under the spectrum when you look at patient populations. So, and being able to be direct, because then the person is like, you are actually talking to me, speaks volumes. But it is easier. Yes, I think that, you know, they're trying to play around with the term. Is this the right term to use? Is that the right term to use? Am I going to offend somebody when I say this, or I'm going to offend somebody when I say that? I want to make sure that no matter what event I go to, this brochure then qualifies for everyone that may come to the table. But the reality is that everyone does not fit under that umbrella. And you have to be able to, because it's in such numbers when you speak to the African American community, and they have a very specific dialogue and understand and absorb information in such a specific way, it's wrong to actually bulk everyone together. And people need to kind of put their misunderstanding and misperceptions aside and really look to examples of what has actually worked. And what has actually worked is when you speak to those bodies of individuals as one unit under African American, Latino, or Asian, and not bundled together as the community of color.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, these conversations have been going on for a long time, and I think we need to continue to just vocalize and say this, because it is problematic. And so thank you for your comments. I have two questions that I'm going to kind of merge, because they're kind of related. So I'm going to preface it by asking, you know, what does the rare disease community need to do in order to improve diagnosis and access to centers of excellence for people in underserved communities? And before getting to that, the question from the audience is on the issue of trust. In my opinion, I feel like trust is a major reason for this. But in the issue of trust, do historical events such as Tuskegee experiments continue to exert an influence on the African American community, keeping them from participating in clinical trials? And if so, any recommendations on how to overcome this?
I'd like to take a quick stab at that. That Tuskegee experiment is you know, there are still shockwaves from that. It comes up often when you do ethnographic research, and you're asking, especially African Americans, why they don't want to participate in a clinical trial. But the medical industry, pharmaceutical industry, has to understand that Tuskegee ended in '72, and as recently as the late '90s, there were still trials going on that smelt of that. I'm thinking of one that was in the late '90s. There was a top tier hospital that I won't name for the big reason is I forgot which one it was, but they were studying, they proposed that there was a genetic etiology for aggressive behavior. So who did they study? Black boys. And what did they do? They isolated these boys from their parents. They gave them a low protein diet. They withdrew their asthma medications, et cetera, et cetera. So those things still continue. And the late '90s is yesterday, basically. So the shockwaves of Tuskegee, plus the way that African Americans and Latinos especially feel that they are treated when they go to a top tier hospital. Again, I'm talking the U.S. News and World Report, the best hospitals in the world. A lot of people a lot of Blacks and Latinos don't feel welcome there. They don't feel that it's for them because traditionally those institutions weren't All right. So you look at a Johns Hopkins, you look at a Cleveland Clinic. When you do work there, people will tell you 30 years ago, there wasn't a black physician here. And they this is new, all these things that we're doing. So I just want to make clear to the person that put that in the chat. Tuskegee, a lot of folks say we should forget about it. No, there are still shockwaves, but it's the perception and the behaviors show us that things have not changed. All right. So the way to overcome it, the way that Marjorie and Pernessa have already articulated, it's extremely important for not only the pharmaceutical industry, but the agencies that they use. Both of them have to understand they've got to go into those communities first. They've got to go in there and start doing the ethnographic research to understand what it's going to take to develop the partnership. Because you are not going to be able to get in if they don't trust you and know you, and the person bringing you in is not like a Pernessa. All right, that's how you get in. It's someone's got to take you into this community and say, listen, you know me, you know the good that I do in this community, you trust me, trust them. All right. So the key is, though, that pharma industry, the pharma company and their agency has to develop the trust with that community influencer. And that's a step I rarely see taken. They usually come in, make a lot of promises, and then disappear. The information is culturally offensive. The strategy, the talking points, the messenger, everything is wrong. And then they wonder why folks don't want to participate. So we've got to understand that those behaviors and beliefs are current and valid. And then the very first step is identifying influential organizations and individuals with whom to partner, and then go out and do that ethnographic research before you launch, or you're going to keep getting what you've been getting. And some companies have found out that the FDA is serious. Some companies have had 1 or 2% African Americans in a rare disease that over-index in African Americans, and they lost an approval they were expecting because the FDA said, you only had 2. I mean, you had less than 1%. Sorry, we can't give you the indication. And now they're all, oh, what are we going to do? Well, they should have done what we've been discussing. Had they done that, they would have gotten more African Americans on, and they probably would be, in a much better position than they're in today.
I want to jump in and just piggyback on that and reiterate again that, Tuskegee, and just like Arnie said, we are experiencing Tuskegee every single day. And I think that, when it comes to, it's just like, where our country is today. Like all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, look what's happening. This has been happening forever and we've been saying it forever. When does the shift happen that Tuskegee happened, several decades ago? But I'm experiencing, me, Miss Middle Class African American, I'm experiencing racism when I go to the healthcare. I can afford my healthcare, but it is because of the color of my skin that I am treated differently when I walk into the lobby of my healthcare facility, or if I'm in the emergency room. And I think that once we get an understanding that we're not just pulling this out the air, that it's really something that has to be addressed, then we can move on and not keep talking about, well, Tuskegee was this, because we had so many Tuskegees before Tuskegee. And we've had Tuskegees after Tuskegees, right up until this very second. So there has got to be a fundamental change in the pharmaceutical industry if we're going to see a fundamental change in African Americans and diverse populations coming into clinical trials. It must be intentional on the pharmaceutical industry to make the shift and make the change.
Agree with both comments that were made. The coronavirus pandemic is the new Tuskegee. It's right. Like the Band-Aid is being ripped off every time it's going to heal. That scab wound gets ripped off over and over again. So it's just a reminder, so that if you always go back to that lineage, you're going to miss the most immediate incident that's causing the African-American population to retreat and to question and to not engage because they are feeling that they are being victimized by the current state of the health industry and what's coming to their community. So every time that there is a news release or an investigation, because we're so social media savvy, individuals have that information at their fingertips. And if they don't have it, someone else who reads it will then share it with them. Every time they're aware of another experiment, most recently just done in the indigenous Indian population, and they're now waiting for retributions to get money back for, and I won't name the company, that did experiments on young children, and they were not told what they were what the drug was actually for. That was the newest. So now it's a cascade effect. It's again happening right now. So how can I trust that that will not happen to me? Because I don't see anyone in industry or any person within this research paradigm that is making a visual, committed intent to tell me and show me otherwise. Behavior, you know, you can talk a good game, but your actions speak much louder than your words. The other thing I want to add to is a point that Arnie made is if you do not go into the community and meet the Pernessas of the world, and let's say you do, a lot of times the misstep is then after you've built that relationship with that point person, and let's say you usually have a point person within your company, then you switch your person. So if you've had someone that you use within your entity or in your team that has now built this 3-year relationship in this community, and all of a sudden you switch it and it's someone that that community does not recognize, you have now set everyone back, because the question will be, well, why did the other person disappear? Now I have a completely different person. Whatever happens in your structure, in your industry, should not then have a ripple effect and affect them. So that if you're taking the time to nurture that relationship, and let's say someone else, for whatever reason, has to enter the equation, then there is a way to do it so that you don't turn off the community. Because once you build a bond with one person, and that community then trusts that person, and it goes, and then they're willing to follow suit, when you change that relationship, when you shift that equation, it sets everyone back. And I don't think individuals think enough. For them, it's rotary. It's like, okay, it's a new position. We're moving one person up, so we're just going to slide someone in there. But that's not how the relationship maintains its health. And that's not how you nurture the relationship. And I don't think that's given enough thought and consideration when changes like that are made. And it has huge effects on the community.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. The relationship piece is major, and you know, you're starting all the way over. You cannot assume that that person's intentions or approach or their style or their demeanor, it doesn't just translate over. It's a very, very sensitive topic, and we need to go about it in a more intentional way, thinking about people in the long term, not just about, you know, my deliverables for this quarter. It doesn't work that way. Thank you for those comments. So I have a couple of questions coming through in the chat. So one of them, I want to start with this question from Samuel. Thank you for your question. So regarding specificity of African American versus POC, so back to our earlier discussion, in case where the intention is to increase the proportion of participation from non-white individuals driven due to current overrepresentation of whites, do you have suggestions for intentionally reaching the larger umbrella of POC that doesn't appear to be ignorant of existence of intra-group variation?
Well, so if you want, so what I'm hearing is if you want non-Caucasian participants, so if you're going to, so what you have to do is go after each of the demographics that you're targeting, and you use the exact same approach, right? So if we're going to go into a South Indian community, we're going to do the same approach. We're going to go to community leaders or physicians that are respected. We're going to say, we're looking for people of this ethnicity. They don't need to hear, we're looking for all people of color. That's not relevant to them. Right? They're just relevant to like, what's in it for me? So I know, for example, if you say, like you heard them say earlier, if you say people of color, the African Americans will say, no, we're very different. We've got, you know, we've got unique, history, we've got unique background, we've had things done to us and have not done to other ethnicities very different. So that what I say is, you don't even bring it up that you're looking for people of color. You speak to every group as an individual group, right? And that way they can see that they're truly valued. If you say people of color, I know with African Americans, like, miss me then. That's not what miss me. My people were never called people of color. There were some names for us that were very specific. So you just have to understand, again, when you're looking at it from their point of view and you've met with leaders and influencers from those communities, they would be the ones to tell you, this is how you say it. This is who you bring with you. This is where you meet with them. And for goodness sakes, please let me see your materials before you deliver them. So I think it's just like that. It's the same thing over and over again. Make sure you're understanding where your target is coming from, your target, your focus, and then please be very sensitive to not making mistakes that are commonly made, by just showing that you're truly trying to meet their needs, that participating in this trial is going to meet their needs because it's going to help the medical industry to treat them better. And that message is rarely articulated appropriately. And people just, I've heard it all since the mid 80s. I've heard offensive, rude, hostile, antagonistic. No, we just have to go after every community as an individual community and show me, don't tell me. Don't tell me you're interested in interviewing South Asians. Where's your South? I don't see one in here. I don't see, you're not, I need somebody here. Like, where is she? So just please just listen to the tips we've already shared.
And then I would just add, if at one point you're doing then a broader event where you're inviting multiple individuals to the table to have a round, a larger discussion, then you're talking about something that's multicultural. But the first thing to do is go to each separate group, as Arnie just said, and meet with them separately. And then once you've established that, you can do something larger, just like in faith-based. You have different faiths that meet under one tent to have discussions, but they are each individual, and then that information and those connections reflect that. I also want to say, piggyback on something you said here earlier. I think a lot of times we're so caught up in our deliverables. It is so not about performance as much as it is about transformation. So if you always just think of, these are my 5 end goals, and you don't ever put that down to think about, how am I going to transform my company, as Pernessa indicated earlier, to show and to be diverse internally, and then to go out, because I've now taught that to my staff, my employees, and I'm now going to these individual communities. If you're not willing to transform, you will never be able to have the performance that you want, which we are measuring in the industry world and in hospitals as outcomes or deliverables. And so if you don't change that mindset, you will not have the success with the community that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's not easy.
No.
By no means is it easy, because we're backtracking in some ways, we're doing new things. It is a huge shift in mindset and approach that can be uncomfortable in terms of, even just your day-to-day, how you go about work.
I'm doing it the old-fashioned way. I just thought of something. What the healthcare industry, pharmaceutical industries, rare disease entities, what they don't do, and I think my panelists are going to crack up when they hear this, they need to understand that the food and beverage industry has it down. The sneaker industry, best in the world.
Yeah.
The soft drink industry, the liquor industry,
Yes.
the military, they have it down.
Yeah.
I was just going to say the name of it. There is a fast food company, the most
Careful.
famous. They have different websites for African Americans, Latinos, and whites. They have different websites. And when I do my presentations, everybody, I've never heard of that. And I just go to the internet and pull it up. Look at that.
Yep.
Look what they're doing. They're sponsoring a gospel fest. You want to know why they're doing that? Look what they're doing. They're sponsoring midnight basketball. Want to know why they're doing that? Look how they're talking to people. Look how they're going into the community. They are experts at that. The US food and beverage industry is the best in the world. The healthcare industry usually on the complete other side. One size fits all. Everything is for those that are already engaged. It's written as if everybody went to college and majored in a STEM. You know, it's the imagery is wrong, the approach is wrong, the messenger is wrong, where they deliver it is wrong. Look at the food and beverage industry, or work with us to do that, and you'll see it's very simple to do. Right. But for some reason, healthcare, rare disease, pharma, they've never grasped what all these other industries have seen and they take advantage of. And you see that Blacks and Latinos spend the most money in certain things. And this is because we've been targeted by these industries effectively. Correct. I'm done.
And I want to piggyback and say that your budget reflects your intentions. Your budget reflects your intentions, you know? So like Arnie said, if you know, these companies are putting money, M-O-N-E-Y, money into making sure that African Americans get their product, you know? So if a farmer has to if they're serious and intentional, then the budget to engage African Americans and diverse communities must be reflected in the budget. When you get to engagement, then you say, well, you know, we really don't have a lot of money. You know, I'm done with that. You know, if you're serious about engaging African Americans in the process, then put the money down, And we cannot have a serious conversation if we're not going to talk about pharma. If you're serious, show me the budget, because if you say one thing and the budget doesn't reflect your intentions, then we're wasting our time.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. So we have now 15 minutes left, and I've got a couple of questions that I want to make sure that I can ask you all. So this question is kind of two comments from the chat, along with another question I was already thinking of in terms of recommendations for what can people do. So we've got some people in the chat, you know, as saying, I'm not a POC. Is there a way as a patient advocate that I can help with this issue? I hardly know anyone with the disease at all, but I do know that people of color, specifically the Black community, has particular diseases and they go undiagnosed in disproportionately high numbers. Is there a role for me somewhere? And in follow-up, another question similar was, we're a patient advocate group for people with autoimmune muscle disease, inflammatory myositis. Autoimmune diseases and myositis specifically disproportionately affect Black women. How can we help better amplify the voices and stories of our Black members and make connections with other Black organizations and patient advocate groups to support their mission?
That's a loaded question. I'll take a stab at the, first I'll take a stab at the second one, the one with the autoimmune. Interestingly enough, so we're talking about illnesses like lupus and all that kind of stuff. And if you're African American, there are actually organizations. I was just looking at, I'm a big cooking channel person. And one of the competitors actually was one of the TV moms, and her daughter has lupus. So she then founded Voice Act, I think was the name of the organization. I could be getting it wrong, but I'll get the right name. Because she realized there were not a lot of people that looked like her daughter that she could talk to when her daughter was experiencing these issues. So as someone who is an integral part of advocacy and advocacy groups, I think one of the things you can definitely do, and we've actually seen this at some of the rare disease conferences, is find an organization that might be talking about or has adopted your illness. And sometimes you need to be broader. For instance, with sickle cell disease, sometimes you just go to blood disorders. I mean, we don't just stick, because there's so many commonalities, and then through that, you then find other individuals who are interested and who want to talk about it. I mean, the other end would also be, and you can, you know, if you're going on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, I think you'll have more access to finding smaller groups that might not have a large website or something, but have a connection to individuals and then you can go from there. I know rare disease keeps a registration of the different illnesses that are represented at their different conferences. So that may be just connecting that organization may be a good way to start, and just find a general umbrella of autoimmune programs. And I think the third one, which is good, is also look at some providers. There are some providers that provide care and who are specialists within these disease processes that are very, very, very passionate and are integral parts of the advocacy group and the advocacy community. So they, in a sense, and some hospitals who are actually quote unquote getting it right, have their own advocacy groups within the hospital, and they meet there and they actually help them. I mean, they give it to the parents to take charge of it and such, but they help them formulate it because they realize that these individuals need a community. And maybe through those avenues, you'll be able to identify individuals, maybe identify groups, and then partner with. I think people are always willing to partner with someone who is passionate about their cause. And as far as if you're not a person of color and you want to participate in the cause, elevate the platform, some of my biggest advocates when I'm not well are people who are not of color, because they've taken the time to know me and know what I go through, to the point that if I walk in a room, this is when you know that someone is really interested and vested. When I walk in a room, even though I can put that smiley face on, they can tell right away, they're like, oh, this is not a good day. That's someone who's vested in what I'm going through. That's someone who's taking the time to really look at the deeper layers of what any rare disease or illness can present and challenge someone with. So that makes me more willing to have a conversation with them. And then their actions speak volumes. They come to the walkathons, they check on me when I'm not well, they ask me if they can send something to me, they support my family, they donate in so many different ways. So I think there is a role for everyone to play a part, as long as you kind of know how to formulate that connection. And you do it in the right way. Because I've also had some people that have come to me and I can tell right off the bat, you're not here for the illness. You're here for a photo or whatever it is. You're here for something else, and you want to write a paper to fulfill something that you had to do in school, so you can say that, oh, I met somebody who had sickle cell disease. We can sniff those a mile away, and then we will also invite them to leave. When somebody says, I'll come to church with you and speak when you are speaking, oh my God, I'm like, really? Did you really just say that? First, it's always a surprise. It's always a surprise, but it's welcomed. And I never say no. The more, the merrier.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. So I have, I'm going to try to get these three more questions. I know we've got another panel again tomorrow. So for participants today, if you'd like to check back with us tomorrow and continue the discussion, please do. And then I know that the panelists will be hopefully open to share their contact information if you'd like to continue on and discuss some further and more specific aspects of your work and how you can improve what you're doing. There's a question here. Normally we allow research and clinical trials to progress naturally based on who is interested or expresses urgent need demographically. At what point would you recommend patient advocacy groups perform ethnographic research to understand disease impact and community for more inclusive and expansive clinical trials? Sorry about the sirens. Are there any groups the panel knows of to assist with that, and what small steps can be taken by foundations with little resources trying to mobilize?
Let's see, how do I word this? I think the steps that they just described should be done automatically.
Yes.
You shouldn't be waiting.
Wait.
You shouldn't be waiting. I'm thinking of a group, I don't know, I haven't spoken with them in about 8 years, but what they do in their city is they do constantly, this is a clinical trial recruitment organization, and they're constantly doing health programs in the big Latino and African American community in their city. Constantly. They're always doing the programs. So whenever they get a contract to do clinical trial recruitment, it takes them no time at all to fulfill their numbers, because they have the relationship, because they're already there. So what the rare disease community has to do is right away, they should be setting up community advocacy boards in large communities immediately. You should be meeting with leaders with, right now, it should be status quo. It should be standard operating procedure that you're doing it, you start tonight. And what you do is then you're going to have to work with folks who understand who to connect you to. But it's imperative that you meet with the civic leaders, the faith-based leaders, the church leaders, the community leaders, and they will help you achieve your mission. But that's got to be it can't be episodic. Right. I mean, that's like the analogy I use is the people that say, I don't have asthma, I just have 15 asthma attacks a year, but I don't have asthma. So it's like, well, if you took your medicine every day, you wouldn't have those 15. So it's the same thing. You should have a relationship with these people all the time, with these organizations all the time. And that way, when you need something, you just slide right along and they will help you because you're a partner of theirs. And that's what I mean by the fast food groups do that. I mean, they understand that. So what we have to understand, especially in the rare space, is we've got to do what makes sense for each culture, and we should be doing it all the time. That way, whenever we need to recruit, it's very easy because it's just yet another step in the relationship.
Yeah, I would add to that I don't think there's the beginning of the question was they wait for the natural process of clinical trial to develop or whatever. And I would say that it's a very proactive process. So there's nothing quite natural about it. You almost have to actually push the envelope. And so that the more information that you already have on your side and to arm yourself and to show what is actually going on, which you would be the best person actually within your community as the advocacy group to look at, because you are in it, as opposed to the pharmaceutical company or whatever other agency would be ordering it and then looking at it. They're going to look at it from a very different perspective. If you're already armed with that info, you've already done the research, like Arnie said, first of all, you'll get plugged in. Second of all, you'll be able to layer the right texture and context that information then needs to be laid within, so there's no misinterpretation when they look at it. So you should be getting that now and not later. And if you're an organization that has limited funds, as he said, there are civic people, there are people in your state representative office. There are also some lawyers who have to do pro bono work, because I know a lot of lawyers who've actually worked with sickle cell advocacy groups to help them start their chapters, so that they're willing to do some work that does not require a huge amount of payment. So start there and then kind of see where it leads.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So I'm gonna pose our final question, and I put this in the chat too. I just wanted to encourage us to turn on our videos if you would like to just say hello and wave. So I will enable video for all audience members that have their video on. And so just a forewarning that I'll be doing that as our speakers respond to our final question and we close out this excellent panel. The final question I'm going to ask is, what excites you most at this time in rare disease research?
What excites me most in rare disease research is my hope. I have an excitement that in this moment of transition and transformation in our country, that pharmaceutical companies will take an assessment of their intentions and do an assessment of how, from the time we've started this conversation 5-10 years ago, what have we done and what do we need to do different? Because and that's my hope, that the opportunity, it excites me that pharmaceutical companies may get caught up in this transformation, that they will begin to assess themselves and make the changes that are necessary to bring African Americans and other communities into the conversation. that they become aware, they themselves become self-aware, that the change must be on the company and not the people they're trying to get into the trial. And that excites me.
I could say I'm excited because for the first time in my life, I'm hearing the phrase ethnic and racial health disparities being spoken from all angles. And it's usually just a few of us having that conversation, and few organizations having that conversation. So I am excited by that. But what to jump on what Pernessa was saying, what the pharmaceutical, especially the rare disease companies have to understand, if their disease is over indexed in Black and Latino communities, we're not talking ethics, we're talking business. If the majority or a very high percentage of the people that should be on your brand have no idea that your brand exists, or they're not even aware of the disease, or they don't understand how important it is to stay on the medication, you're losing money. So it's a business decision, right? And if you look at it that way, just like other industries have done, then you will understand, I need to do this for my bottom line. And so that's what I'm excited about, is I'm hearing racial and ethnic disparities, and I'm hearing people talking about the underlying causes for why there are disparities in COVID. But I would love for the pharma industry, especially the rare groups, to understand, you're looking at beta thalassemia, sickle cell, hereditary amyloidosis, all of these blood anemias, these anemias and so forth. A majority or very high percentage of your people would live in these communities. So your strategy has to reflect that in order for you to pull money from those communities. So that's what's exciting to me, is that this is a great opportunity now for them to seize on racial disparities as a business opportunity.
Right, because business talks. And if that's their bottom line, it moves the needle. So I agree with both of my esteemed panelists that I've been presenting with today. And I would add that the only other thing that really makes me hopeful is that I have in the past year seen more light bulbs go off than not. And when I say light bulb, I feel like more individuals, when they're part of that conversation, are actually getting it and formulating action steps to make change happen. And this conversation wasn't being had at all. Certain words were not even put into the same sentence. And if I've helped someone else have that light bulb go off, then that's awesome. And that right now is what, in my young 20-umpteenth years of a career, I think I've seen the most light bulbs in the past 9 months than I've ever seen. So I'm hopeful that will keep on moving forwards. And this will just get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Thank you all so very much. And thanks to everybody who joined us, and thanks for getting on video to say hello. Arnie, thank you. Marjorie, thank you. And Pernessa, thank you so much for leading a great discussion. And thank you to the audience for those excellent questions as well. I want to encourage everybody to head over to the 2020 Cure Accelerator Live for Rare Disease session. You can find it on the agenda in the auditorium. You'll be able to select the join button and get into the session. And of course, if there's issues, please let us know. We are all standing by to support you, making sure you can join us. So thank you so much. We'll be continuing the conversation tomorrow if you'd like to join us. Have a great day, and please be in touch with us at Global Genes. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.